Malicious Compliance, Episode 2. The manager of my apartment complex refused to accept cash for a 2-cent bill, so I activated malicious compliance mode. In 2019, I moved out of an apartment complex in Celebration, Florida, which was managed by a property management company, and into a privately rented apartment. Usually, when you move out, you receive a final statement that includes the last month's rent, deductions for damage, the return of your security deposit, and similar charges. We paid that final bill. The following month, my wife called and told me that another bill from the management company had arrived in the mail. The amount due was 2 cents. We both work in IT, so we laughed about the fact that their system had failed to handle such a ridiculous edge case. They had spent about 50 cents on postage to collect a 2-cent debt. Fine. These things happen. My wife printed a copy of the bill, and I took 2 pennies from our change jar. The apartment complex was on my way to work, so I stopped by the office. I walked in and told the manager that I wanted to pay my final balance. I said, "Here's the bill for 2 cents, and here are your 2 cents. Do you need anything else?" She replied, "We do not accept cash." Then she said nothing. After an awkward pause, I explained that I had not really expected her to take the coins. I assumed we would both laugh at how stupid computer systems can be, and then she would simply write off the 2 cents because processing the payment would cost them more than the debt itself. She said, "I am not going to do that." After another awkward pause, I asked, "So you want me to write a check for 2 cents, mail it to you, and make you process the check?" She replied, "Yes. Send us a check, and we will process it." Then she walked back into her office, ending the conversation. All right. I went home and created an automatic monthly bank payment of 3 cents to the apartment complex. Since I am a programmer, I also wrote a script that sent them a letter every month saying, "I am very sorry, but I accidentally overpaid my account. Please mail me a refund check for the amount of the overpayment." I also used an online service that mailed absurdly large postcards, about 18 by 24 inches. I wanted to escalate the conflict properly. At the beginning of the next month, a regional manager from the property management company called me. He introduced himself and spent the next 2 minutes apologizing with complete sincerity. "Oh my God, we made a mistake. Please do not continue doing this. We will never bother you again." I canceled the letters and never heard from the company again. So yes, because of a 2-cent bill, I spent several hours setting up this spiteful little operation. Was it worth it? Absolutely. A security guard forced us to show him the 5 most recent photos on our phones. This is a story about my coworker, a true hero who complied with security's demands in the most malicious way possible. On one of our subcontracting jobs, the client was a manufacturer of high-end electronic components. Security at the facility was extremely strict because a small box measuring roughly 4 by 5 inches could contain microchips worth $250,000. Our team spent 1 week installing equipment at the site. Every time we entered or left the building, we had to pass through a security checkpoint. Mr. Security Guard, who had strong Paul Blart, mall cop energy, decided that my coworker Steve looked more suspicious than the other 4 technicians. Every time Steve passed through the checkpoint, the guard made him empty his pockets and show the 5 most recent photos on his phone to prove that he was not stealing trade secrets. That might have been understandable if the guard had checked everyone, but he waved every other worker through without any inspection at all. Steve tried to remain positive, but the whole thing clearly annoyed him. He stayed aggressively cheerful and made comments such as, "Thank you, Paul Blart, for keeping America safe," which made the rest of our team laugh every time. Eventually, Steve came up with an idea that freed him from the guard for the rest of the week. On Wednesday morning, Steve received the usual excessive inspection when we entered. When we passed through the checkpoint again at lunch, Steve said that he needed to use the bathroom. A few minutes later, he returned slightly out of breath. The guard stopped us on the way out and asked to inspect Steve's phone gallery. Steve handed over the phone with a satisfied smile. The guard unexpectedly found several photographs of Steve's bare ass, taken from extremely unusual angles. "What the hell?" the guard shouted as he threw the phone onto the table. Steve replied, "Oh, sorry. I thought I had hemorrhoids and wanted to see how bad it looked." "Are the photos okay from a security standpoint?" The guard never checked his phone again. Excellent work, Steve. I do not care whether he is dead. Put him on the phone. My father died on Father's Day in 2012. He was divorced and lived alone, and I was his only child, which meant I had to settle all of his affairs. This story is about our attempt to cancel his utility services. I called the utility company and asked what I needed to do to close the account. The woman on the phone said that we had to send them a certified copy of the homeowner's death certificate. The next day, I mailed them a certified copy of my father's death certificate. However, another bill arrived the following month. I called again and reached a different employee. She told me that because my name was not listed on the account, she needed to speak directly with the account holder. I explained that the account holder was dead, but she refused to listen and continued insisting that she had to speak with him personally. So I scheduled an appointment with the manager, allowing her to speak with the account holder face to face. I arrived at the utility office carrying another copy of the death certificate and my father's ashes in the clear plastic bag in which the crematorium had returned them to me. I placed the bag of ashes on her desk and asked her to tell him that I loved him when she finished speaking with him. The woman turned pale, jumped out of her chair, and called the police. When the officers arrived, she claimed that I had assaulted her. My father's remains were still lying on her desk beside the death certificate. The officers asked why I had done it, so I explained everything. They called the manager's supervisor, and the two employees stepped away from the desk to speak privately. While they were talking, the officers came over to speak with me. They said I probably should not have brought human remains into a public office, but I had not broken any laws. I told them that I agreed it was extreme, but the employee had insisted on speaking with my father personally. By then, the utility employees had finished their discussion. The manager's supervisor suddenly became extremely polite and resolved the issue, but the story did not end there. A few days later, I had to call again to reconnect the utilities at the house under my own name. As soon as the representative saw the address and my name, I was immediately placed on hold. The supervisor who had helped me picked up the call. She spoke to me very kindly and waived every additional fee related to reconnecting the service. At the end of the conversation, she again apologized for the lack of compassion shown by the staff. She also told me that the original employee had been fired. A police officer tried to intimidate my patient, but he lost a fight with the laws of physics. I work on an ambulance. A few months ago, my partner and I were returning from a scheduled patient transfer when I noticed a woman sitting on the side of the road at an intersection about 4 blocks from our station. She had wrapped her arms around herself and lowered her head. I lightly nudged my partner, who was driving, and we turned on the scene lights. The woman suddenly looked up and appeared terrified. I stepped out of the ambulance. As soon as she saw what vehicle we were in, she visibly relaxed. When I moved closer, I noticed bruises around her wrists and other signs that suggested domestic abuse. She seemed hesitant to stand up and enter the ambulance, so I decided to pull the stretcher out of the rear compartment and give her somewhere better to sit than the concrete curb. Here are a few important details. Our ambulances use bright yellow striker stretchers with black handles and side panels. They contain a motor and battery, allowing us to raise and lower the cot with a button instead of destroying our backs by lifting it manually. The stretchers normally work with an automatic loading system inside the ambulance. The system raises the cot to the correct height, guides it into the vehicle, and locks it into place. Near the rear doors, at the end of the loading rail, there is a small red release latch. Pressing it unlocks both the stretcher and the loading carriage. You then have to control the stretcher until it reaches the unloading position and locks again. This can be difficult because the stretcher alone weighs about 120 pounds. The moment I pressed the release latch, I heard a police siren behind me. It was a city police vehicle, which was strange. We had not requested police assistance, and we were outside the city limits in the sheriff's department's jurisdiction. We had only told dispatch that we were stopping to check on a woman at the intersection. When the woman saw the police car, she shouted something like, "Oh God, he is here," and suddenly ran. She rushed past me, climbed into the ambulance, and quickly sat down inside. A police officer approached us. He looked furious. I put the pieces together and closed the ambulance doors. "Let us call him Officer." He demanded. "Is that woman in there?" I asked. "Which woman?" He replied. You know exactly who I mean. I said, Do you mean my patient? I am afraid I do not know her name yet. He ordered me to open the doors because he needed to speak with her. I told him, I am not allowing you to use my ambulance as an interrogation room. You can speak with her at the hospital. We argued for another few minutes. My partner walked over to see what was happening, realized something was wrong, returned to the cab, and called our supervisor. I continued delaying the officer and refused to let him enter the ambulance until 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. They had probably been called by our supervisor. Good. Now I had witnesses. Here is where physics entered the story. We had stopped on a slight incline. I had already pressed the latch that released the stretcher, so it was resting against the rear doors. Because I had needed to close the doors quickly, I had not pushed it fully back into place or locked it again. Feeling braver now that 2 deputies were present, the officer grabbed me by the face and shoved me aside. Get out of the way. You are obstructing an officer, he said. Fine. I stepped away. He opened the ambulance doors. The stretcher, monitor, and emergency bag had been leaning against them. Together they weighed roughly 155 pounds. The entire load rolled out and slammed directly into the officer's chest. He flew backward and landed hard on his ass. One of the deputies laughed out loud. The other knelt beside the officer and said, The shift supervisor will be here in 5 minutes. If I were you, I would not stay around. The officer got back to his feet, glared at me, and left. I cannot discuss much about the aftermath because the court case is still ongoing. But we all know how easily police officers often avoid serious consequences. The woman now lives somewhere else. The officer is still working as a police officer. I have been pulled over at least twice a week ever since. However, the video of our stretcher knocking that officer flat onto his backside remains one of my favorite recordings. Thank you very much for watching. Share your own similar stories in the comments below the video, and do not forget to watch our other videos. Hugs. Bye.